come into this circle of loss and humanity. Come into this circle of compassion. Come into this circle of memory. Come in to this circle of love. Come, let us worship together.
Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Berkeley. My name is Deborah Schmidt. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am your worship associate this morning. This is a welcoming congregation, and we are always working on how to better welcome and care for one another. If this is your first time here, we are so glad you have found us, and whoever you are, we welcome you in the fullness of who you are. As we begin, we want to acknowledge that this church occupies land in Huichin, the unceded territory of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. We understand that we continue to benefit from the seizure and occupation of this land. We acknowledge and embrace our responsibility to take restorative action. We affirm that this is deeply felt and commit our congregation to be in right relationship with Indigenous communities, aligning in solidarity, supporting Indigenous projects, and caring properly for the land. Please take a moment to prepare yourself and your space for our time together. You might want to bring a candle and a way to light it so that you can join in the chalice lighting from home. Now, let us kindle our flames with the words of Michael de Vernon Boblet. You are invited to join in the refrain, "We are not alone." We are not alone. We are this flame, ancient as the stars, new as the vulnerable spark. We are not alone. We are this chalice, rimmed by the spiral dance of searching. We are not alone. We are the light soaring, the shadow deepening, the dance between them. We are not alone. We are the heirs of the tribes and their fires, the healers and their circles. We are not alone. We are here. We are here for ourselves. We are here for each other. And we are not alone. Now please join us in singing our opening song. The title and the words will be on the screen.
When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell our stories from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our heart stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place.
Please join with me in saying our covenant. This week we will share the long version. We covenant to build a religious community guided by love and sustained by respectful relationships. Believing that building healthy relationships is a spiritual practice, we aim to listen appreciatively, speak with care, express gratitude, honor our differences, and assume good intentions. We endeavor to communicate directly, honestly, and compassionately, particularly when we are in conflict. When we hurt one another, we will try to forgive, make amends, and reconnect in a spirit of love. In celebration of the common purpose that unites us, we will do our best to abide by this covenant.
Tis a gift to be simple, tis the gift to be free, tis the gift to come down where you ought to be. And when you find yourself in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight.
When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed to turn Turn will be our delight, till by turning, turning we come round right.
'Tis the gift to be simple, 'tis the gift to be true, 'tis the gift to labor till the day is through. And when you find yourself in the place so fine, put me in the cool of the birch and the pine. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed. To turn, turn will be our delight, till by turning, turning we come round right.
Tis the gift to be joyful, tis the gift to be free, tis the gift, tis the gift, tis the simple gift to be. And when you find yourself filled with pure delight, the gift to be simple has led you aright. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed. To turn, turn will be our delight, till by turning, turning we come round right. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed. To turn, turn will be our delight, till by turning, turning we come round right. In the place just right, till by turning, turning we come round right.
Our story today is from the last chapter of The House at Pooh Corner, which is overall the first of the books about Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Robin and all of their friends. It's come to the animals' attention that Christopher Robin is going away. He's growing up is really what's happening. They gather together and Eeyore writes this poem. Here it is. Christopher Robin is going. At least I think he is. Where? Nobody knows, but he is going. I mean, he goes, to rhyme with nose. Do we care to rhyme with where? We do, very much. I haven't got a rhyme for that. Is in the second line. Bother. Now I haven't got a rhyme for bother. Bother. Those two bothers will have to just rhyme with each other. Bother. The fact is, this is more difficult than I thought. I ought, very good indeed, I ought to begin again. But it is easier to stop. Christopher Robin, goodbye. I and all your friends all your friend, send, very awkward this poem keeps going wrong. Well, anyway, we send our love, the end. When Christopher Robin had finished reading, and was looking up to say thank you, only Pooh was left. It's a comforting sort of thing to have, said Christopher Robin, folding up the paper and putting it in his pocket. Come on, Pooh. And he walked off quickly. They walked on, thinking of this and that, and by they came to an enchanted place at the very top of the forest called Galleon's Lap, which is 60-something trees in a circle. Christopher Robin knew it was enchanted because nobody had ever been able to count whether it was 63 or 64, not when they had tied a piece of string round each tree after having counted it. Then Christopher Robin, who was looking out at the world with his chin in his hands, called out, "Pooh?" "Yes," said Pooh. When, Pooh?" "Yes, Christopher Robin. I'm not going to do nothing anymore." "Never again?" "Well, not so much. They don't let you." Pooh waited for him to go on, but he was silent again. "Yes, Christopher Robin," Pooh said hopefully. "Pooh, when I'm not doing nothing, will you come here sometimes?" "Just me?" "Yes, Pooh." "Will you be here too?" "Yes, Pooh, I will be, really. I promise I will be, Pooh." "That's good," said Pooh. "Pooh, promise you won't forget about me ever, not when I'm 100. Pooh thought for a while. "How old shall I be then?" 99. Pooh nodded. "I promise," he said. Still with his eyes on the world, Christopher Robin put out a hand and felt for Pooh's paw. "Pooh," said Christopher Robin earnestly, if I'm not quite," he stopped and tried again. "Pooh, whatever happens, you will understand, won't you?" "Understand what?" "Oh, nothing." He laughed and jumped to his feet. "Come on." "Where?" said Pooh. "Anywhere," said Christopher Robin. So they went off together. But wherever they go, and whatever happens to them on the way, in that enchanted place on the top of a forest, a little boy and his bear will always be playing.
Little boy kneels at the foot of the bed, droops on the little hand's little gold head. Hush, hush, whisper who dares, Christopher Robin is saying his prayers. God bless Mommy, I know that's right. Wasn't it fun in the bath tonight? The cold so cold and the hot so hot. Oh, God bless Daddy, I quite forgot. If I open my fingers a little bit more, I can see Nanny's dressing gown on the door. It's a beautiful blue, but it hasn't a hood. Oh, God bless Nanny and make her good. Mine has a hood and I lie in bed and I pull the hood right over my head and I shut my eyes and I curl up small and nobody knows that I'm there at all. Oh, thank you, God, for a lovely day. And what was the other I had to say? I said, bless Daddy, so what can it be? Oh, now I remember, God bless me. Little boy kneels at the foot of the bed, droops on the little hand's little gold head. Hush, hush, whisper who dares, Christopher Robin is saying his prayers.
We now enter into the time of our service that we make for our hearts and our spirits, for our cares and concerns for one another. We lift up and hold the joys and sorrows, the cares and concerns, and the challenges that each may be facing. During our time of silence this morning, I invite you to share any joys or sorrows or significant milestones of your own in the comments. I invite us all to hold these cares in the compassionate embrace of this loving community. I shall now share the words of Robert T. Western. I will lift up my voice. I will lift up my voice and sing whatever may befall me. I will still follow the light which kindles song. I will listen to the music arising out of grief and joy alike. I will not deny my voice to the song, for in the depth of winter, song, like a bud peeping through the dry crust of earth, brings back memory and creates anew the hope and anticipation of spring. Out of a world that seems barren of hope, song descries beauty in the shape of leafless trees, lifts our eyes to distant mountains which, even if we see them not, remind us that they are there, waiting, and still calling to us to come up higher, out of the destruction of dear hopes, out of the agony of heartbreak. Song rises once more to whisper to us that even this is but the stage setting for a new beginning, and that we shall yet take the pieces of our hearts and put them together in a pattern of deeper, truer lights and shades. I will lift up my voice in song, for in singing I am renewed, and the darkness of night is touched by the promise of a new dawn. For the light shall come again. Now let us join in singing, Winds, Be Still.
Winds be still, storm clouds pass and silence come. Peace grace this time with harmony. Fly, bird of hope, and shine, light of love, and in calm land of tranquility. Birds fly high, lift our gaze toward distant view, help us to sense life's mystery.
Our liberal faith draws from many sources, including humanist, Christian, and Jewish teachings, the words of prophetic people in many times and places, and wisdom from other traditions. But the first source of our faith is our own experience. As part of our exploration of grief today, I'm going to share with you a poem I wrote about losing my father, who was first taken from me by divorce when I was very young, and then taken again, this time by death, when he was only 45. I was just 22. This poem contains mention of death by gun violence. Letter to my father. In amber lamplight of earliest memory, I'm sitting on your lap in print footy pajamas, turning the pages of Mother Goose. I was so young when we lost each other, sundered by divorce. Over and over I woke from nightmare crying out your name, powerless to bring you back. For years I could only finger the dark, dinted braille of type, teasing your voice from scant letters. Not until I was grown could I find you. We listened to Beethoven and sailed the Blue Jay on the bay, just beginning to be easy with one another. And then I lost you again to a distraught lover with a gun from the glass cabinet where your rifles leaned in a sinister row, cleaned, oiled, waiting. No one let me see you. The casket was closed. Numb, beset by the urgency of sleep, I did not recognize my own grief in the shape it took. Only when I heard the elegy from the Tchaikovsky serenade, the tender contrary motion, treble and bass pulling apart and drawn together, filling the hall, the same hall where I once played for you, did the tears come. You have been gone now for almost as long as you lived. I am left to imagine you, filtering resentments from my mother's stories, weaving fantasy, memory, and gleanings from old photographs, tracing your hands, your eyes, the workings of your mind in mine. You are incompletely remembered, partially invented, wholly longed for. I am still yearning to crawl up into your warm lap and open Mother Goose.
Jacqueline Onassis Kennedy. She was viewed as the perfect grieving widow, well-dressed, well put together, making the appearances she needed to be, and holding everything together. Well, seemingly holding everything together, because the truth was, she wasn't. She'd go home, put her kids in bed, and then utterly fall apart every single night. But then get up in the morning, put herself back together, and carry on like she was expected to. What she's really an example of is the utterly wonky expectations we have as a society about grief and grieving and what folks are supposed to do it like. To top that off, it's one of the least frequent topics of conversation. Now, we have no problem talking about death, and it frankly comes up rather readily, but grief, on the other hand, is one that apparently we are supposed to do off on our own, and that most folks are rather well equipped to respond to adequately. But loss and grief are things we will all face many times throughout our lives. Whether it is a loss from a death or one of many other kinds of loss, it is something we will face many, many times. You've probably heard the truism that the only things inevitable in life are death, taxes, and nuclear decay. Okay, maybe you didn't hear that version. You heard the death, taxes, and entropy. But either way, death and loss are inevitable. So I thought it would be good to take some time for us today to talk about it for a bit. So let's start with a definition of grief. Grief is the normal and natural reaction to a loss of any kind. That's it. Grief is the normal and natural reaction to a loss of any kind. Grieving doesn't mean that we're broken in any way or that we're abnormal in any way, although society has certainly worked hard to try to convince us of that, with profoundly mistaken messages like that only grief for certain types of loss is normal, and that grief happens a certain kind of way or goes through a certain series of stages or takes a certain amount of time. But none of those are true. Grief is simply the natural human reaction to a loss of any kind. Now let's back up for a second to address the topic of loss. There are all sorts of different things that represent losses that might happen in each of our lives. Some things may be positive in one sense, but also include an aspect of loss, like moves or school graduations or retirements. Some things might be easier to see losses, tangible things like a death or the ending of a relationship or the loss of a job. Other losses might be less tangible, like the loss of a physical ability or the loss of trust or loss of a sense of safety. A number of years ago, I went through training with the Grief Recovery Method and the Grief Recovery Institute to become a facilitator. But before that, another hospital chaplain that I worked with wanted to introduce me to this because it was something he used in his work. So he invited me to assist him with a group he was leading. I said that would be fine. I didn't really have any losses I was working on. He replied, and I still remember this line, "We'll work on that." One of the things that we did in the group was, to work on our own loss history timelines. And in the process, I discovered, not one or two losses that I was carrying, but a grand total of 74 different losses that I could do some work on. Apparently, we did work on that. There are many different kinds of losses, and there are many different kinds of relationships. Every relationship is unique, and every loss is unique. Thus, every person's grief for any loss is also unique. In the category of things that are unhelpful to say to someone who's grieving, one of the classics is the "I know how you feel" one. Ever said that one? I sure have, and I've even heard it coming out of my mouth since getting trained up on working with folks who are grieving. I heard it, but couldn't stop it out in time and listened in horror to myself speaking it. There are certainly a lot of things that are unhelpful that folks do or say to someone who is grieving. The problem is, there isn't a lot of proper training and life experience we get. And many of the myths and unhelpful comments just end up getting passed down from generation to generation. It's not that our parents and guardians and families and friends are intentionally giving us bad advice or bad examples to follow. It's that they're just sharing what they know and what they've been taught. Grief specialist John James shares about a few of the less than helpful lessons that he learned about how to grieve. So here's a story about a dog that he had. John's first memory about learning to deal with loss comes from when he was 5 years old. Here it is. We had a family dog. This dog adopted me from the moment I arrived home from the hospital. When I was old enough to crawl, I'd pull the dog's tail, and she'd let me get away with it. The dog would go everywhere with me. As I grew older, I tried to teach the dog to retrieve. To this day, I'm not sure who taught whom how to retrieve, but that's a different matter. The dog always found a way to sleep with me each night. This drove my mother to distraction, but the dog and I were persistent, and eventually Mom gave up. Then, one morning, I called to my dog and she didn't get up. I remember how cold she felt when I touched her. I remember being afraid. I called to my mom to help me, and she told me that my dog had died. I'm certain she tried to explain what death was. I'm also certain she didn't know how. For the next several days after the dog died, John cried a lot and spent a great deal of time in his room. My parents felt inadequate in knowing what to do to help me, he remembers. Finally, in total frustration, John's father said, quote, "Don't cry. On Saturday, we'll go get you a new dog." John's father's words carried a few messages. First, don't cry, meaning don't feel bad. And on Saturday, we'll get you a new dog, meaning replace the loss so you can feel better. John believed his father. He began to form a belief about dealing with loss. He tried to follow his father's advice and not feel bad. To a young child who wanted his father's approval, this was powerful communication from one of the most important authority figures in his life. And as John explains, I thought that if this was the way my father deals with death, then this is the way I'm supposed to deal with it. Sure enough, on Saturday, John's dad took him to the kennel and they got a new dog. As John reflected, I still missed my old dog, but I didn't tell anyone. I didn't think they'd approve of it. There are other less than helpful lessons were taught and myths were taught. If you're going to cry, do it alone. Grieve alone, either because that's what you saw others do, or it's in response to others being uncomfortable with your obvious emotions. It means that when someone has experienced a loss, things like give her some space or he needs to be alone are often heard. And then there's the time heals all wounds, or all it takes is time one. Now, it is true that grief takes time to process, but it's not time itself that's healing. It's what you do with the time that makes a difference. Okay, then there's the be strong for others one. I'm guessing you've heard some version of that, at least at some point. I think this one almost feeds and reinforces so many of the other myths and ends up looking like how Jackie Kennedy was faring, looking just fine on the outside, but really nothing like that on the inside. There are a lot of myths that we may have about loss and grieving, and they are really not all that helpful. There's one more that often gets classified as a myth, but it's an interesting one. It's the notion that it's helpful to keep busy. Now, it's true that simply staying busy doesn't actually help with the grief and is really just a distraction. But you know, we also need the distractions. In the overall area of grief work, there's something that has a super fancy professional name that I want to tell you about. Okay, it's not super fancy and professional. I just say that to be silly. So here's the name. It's a STERB. STERB. Short-term energy relieving behavior. STERB. What that really means as a short-term energy relieving behavior is distractions and relief. Facing loss and grieving are emotionally weighty things, especially when it's new and fresh and feels like 1,000,000 pounds weighing on top of you. And it's really impossible for us humans to be facing that 24/7. We need some relief. We need distraction. That's really what the STERBs are. Go ahead and think about that. What do you do when you need distraction or comfort? There are a number of things that come up for a lot of folks. Eating chocolate, keeping busy with work, exercise, chocolate, shopping, sleeping, reading favorite books, eating in general. Did I mention eating chocolate? Then, of course, there are some less physically healthy ones like alcohol and drug use. Aside from the ones that are less healthy for our bodies, I think STIRBs, those short-term energy-relieving behaviors, are a good thing. And they help us to be able to take a break from this tsunami so that we can be able to do our grieving as we can. The catch, though, is that they are short-term energy-relieving behaviors, not long-term emotional avoidance behaviors. All too often, they turn into the latter of those rather than the former. We're not looking for long-term emotional avoidance, just short-term relieving behaviors. There is another huge myth about grief that I want to take a moment to address because it is just so omnipresent. That's the so-called stages of grief, articulated about 50 years ago by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. You may be familiar with those as well. They are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Now, I'm only saying them once, and don't go memorizing them because they aren't what they say they are. So first of all, those stages came out of a study in a paper that Kubler-Ross published those 50 years ago. But the study and paper, they weren't about grief. They weren't done on folks who were grieving, not that at all. The study was done on a small group of patients, less than two dozen patients, who had just received terminal medical diagnoses. And what it was doing was the stages were seeking to make sense of the emotions that the patients themselves went through after receiving those diagnoses. Now, it didn't take long for the stages from her paper to morph into being called stages of grief, even if they were never intended to be. And we can't too much blame the folks who did that either. With the utter dearth of information out there on grieving, especially 50 years ago, it was something. The problems are that first, it isn't accurate, and second, talking about stages as in things that everyone progresses through when grieving has probably done more harm than good over time. There was a large-scale study done much more recently that queried grieving people on whether they experienced those 5 stages. And the only one that they found that folks experienced in any significant quantity was acceptance. Acceptance of the reality of the loss. And that has certainly borne out in my work with folks who are grieving. In fact, out of those stages, the denial one, I've only seen what looked like denial once. And that was a family in the hospital who had just been told that their loved one had died. And the matriarch of the family seemed to be in denial of that fact, but actually wasn't. After talking with her for a couple of minutes, I figured out that she literally just couldn't hear what the doctor had said. It wasn't denial. She just hadn't received the information yet. Once she did, she understood and accepted the reality. But even if there aren't stages or phases, there are certainly things that are commonly experienced by folks who are grieving. Doesn't mean all people grieving experience each of these, or that you'll experience them at any time, but it means that these are common and normal, and every single one of these is normal and natural. These are things like feeling overwhelmed, difficulty concentrating, difficulty sleeping or too much sleep, feeling numb, a change in eating habits, a roller coaster of emotional energy. I bet you can relate to at least a couple of those, thinking back from when you've experienced a loss, and every single one of them is normal and natural. Grief is the natural human reaction to a loss of any kind. And just like our relationships are all unique, our griefs are unique also. Grieving is both a deeply emotional process as well as a deeply spiritual one. In normal times, grief is hard work. It is work. It's hard work. This past year and a half of the pandemic have made it a lot more difficult, though. With a lot of our usual ways of being disrupted, our being able to see our families and friends challenged or changed, delays in services or other remembrances, not being able to visit folks when they are having a challenging time, and most of all, so much loss. If there ever was a time to hold ourselves and each other tenderly, that's now. Even if we aren't quite sure what to say to each other and find ourselves at a loss for that, simply our presence and our caring are the most helpful thing that we can do. We are all part of this great human circle, living through losses and gains, through joys and sorrows as we move through our lives. And we have the blessings and the presence of one another as we journey through them. Let us remember that and hold on to one another, to hold on as we can. May it be so.
As we commit together to making this a loving community, we take time to remember that UUCB needs our gifts and support. We invite you now to make an offering. Each week, half our offerings are shared with a Good Neighbor organization who needs our financial support, and we hope you will continue to practice generosity with them during these difficult times. This month, our Good Neighbor is GRIP, the Greater Richmond Interfaith Program. GRIP is a multicultural, multi-ethnic coalition of congregations from varied faiths, working together as a diverse and inclusive coalition dedicated to helping those of our community in need to transition to self-sufficiency. Their mission statement reads, "Responding to the call of service, GRIP transforms the lives of homeless, hungry, and disenfranchised people." Offerings of any value are received with gratitude. Details on how to give electronically will appear on your screen as our offertory begins. Thank you.
How could I know I would have to leave you? How
Please join me in dedicating our offering. We dedicate our offering and ourselves to the mission of this congregation, to create loving community, inspire spiritual growth, and encourage lives of integrity, joy, and service. It is always so good to be together in worship, even virtually. Before our closing song and the postlude, may I remind you to check out all the things that are available in our congregation, even during the pandemic, by exploring our website, uucb.org. There you can find a link under News to the week ahead, our weekly email newsletter, which includes a list of activities, announcements, and contact information. Here are a couple of highlights. Nominations for our 2022 Good Neighbor program are due at the end of October. Please fill out the nomination form from the week ahead and return it to Natalie Campbell at nataliehcampbell@yahoo.com by October 31st. Thank you. And most exciting, we return to in-person worship on Halloween. The pandemic has taught us the value of making our services available via the internet, so this will be our first multi-platform service, both live and live stream, with COVID protocols in place for safety. Look for details in the week ahead, and come in costume. Now, please join in singing our closing song. The title and words will be on your screen.
We'll close today's service with words by George Odell. We need one another when we mourn and would be comforted. We need one another when we are in trouble and afraid. We need one another when we are in despair, in temptation, and need to be recalled to our best selves again. We need one another when we would accomplish some great purpose and cannot do it alone. We need one another in the hour of success when we look for someone to share our triumphs. We need one another in the hour of defeat, when with encouragement we might endure and stand again. We need one another when we come to die and would have gentle hands prepare us for our journey. All our lives we are in need, and others are in need of us. Go from here with hope, with courage, with companionship, and with peace. And remember, you are never all alone. Blessed be.